This video will be about validating Metadata Maestro records and correcting errors. Once you have a metadata record populated in Maestro, the next step is to validate it. Validation is a check to see that the content you have entered into Maestro meets two things. Firstly, the rules of the MEDIN standard, and secondly, the rules of the ISO standard XML. The video you're watching is based on a simulated MEDIN record, which has errors deliberately introduced in order to demonstrate validation. To validate, click on Metadata within the Metadata profile window and select View XML. When performing the post-validation fixes, MEDIN recommend that the various branches of the tree on the left-hand side are all fully expanded, as this will help identify any errors. Once the View XML option has been selected, the XML for the record is visible in this window. Ignore this, but instead focus your attention on the two tabs at the bottom called XML Schema and Schematron. If either of these has errors in it, these need to be addressed. Maestro also has a function that highlights some of the errors by turning parts of the tree in the left-hand side red, for example the geographic bounding box here. This indicates that mandatory content here is flawed or absent. This will need to be checked, but first of all we will look at the Schematron errors as these have been highlighted. Clicking the tab shows a report about each of the errors. In this case, the second error again refers to the geographic bounding box, whereas the first error is a little less clear. With experience of Maestro, these errors become easier to decode. For now, the clue to look at in this first error is that it refers to constraints, which is another word for limitations. There's a subsection within the identification information branch that deals with limitations on access, so we'll go here and examine what's present. Opening up the branch here shows an MD legal constraints sub-branch, just like what was mentioned in the error. A visual check of the contents shows that there are areas highlighted in red which should be populated but are empty. Under conditions applying for access and use, some free text should be entered into the box in order to define what, if any, restrictions on accessing the data are in place. Press enter to enter it into the box. Similarly, under the conditions applying for use, a tick box needs selecting, then information needs to be entered in the other constraints box. Inspire regulations require the tick box to be other restrictions, but any content can be entered in the other constraints provided it describes something about the control on use of the data, such as a license or suitability for certain situations. Now, if we return to the View XML page, we can see that we have got rid of that first error and we are left with the geographic bounding box error. So if we click on the red element here, the geographic bounding box, and expand it out, you can see that the 4 coordinate sub-elements are visible. The right hand of the window will show that there is no content in any of the 4 boxes, which are red. So if we populate these and then review the XML, it should be fixed. So we can see that the errors are now not returned and the red text on the geographic bounding box has disappeared, and also that the red bar at the top of the screen has turned green. This indicates that the content of the metadata record is now valid in terms of meeting the mandatory, conditional and optional rules of the MEDIN standard, and also in terms of the ISO 19115 standard. It does not mean the record makes sense, however. Garbage in equals garbage out. The entries in subjects such as the title, abstract, lineage, etc. all need to be quality checked by eye before submission to MEDIN. It's also best practice not to copy text directly from reports into Maestro, but step through a text editor first in order to catch any irregular symbols that could corrupt the metadata.